Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very respected professor with a deep understanding of South Asia from the USA, Professor C. Christine Fair. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Fair is the professor of security studies at the Georgetown University Center for Security Studies. Her research focuses upon security and political affairs of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and has an acute focus upon Islamist militant groups and the communities that support them. Her latest book is The Literature of Lashkar-e-Taiba, Deadly Lines of Control. So, Christine, my first question for you, before we come to South Asia, what first drew you to study South Asia and security affairs during your academic journey?
It's a circuitous route. It's more of a kahani than a jawab.
Mhm,
When I was an undergraduate, I studied biochemistry. And so most of my friends were actually South Asian.
mhm,
And the people that I worked with in my lab were largely South Asian.
mhm,
When a lot of people were taking Western Civ to fulfill their requirement, I took South Asian civilizations to fulfill my requirement. I also began studying Hindi. For a variety of personal reasons, I transitioned out of the sciences. And when I was looking for a new career, it seemed rather natural to me that I would apply to PhD programs in South Asian languages and civilizations. And so that's what I did. So it really came out of my experiences as an undergraduate.
wow. And you speak not just Hindi, but several other South Asian languages as well.
Well, my main languages are Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi. I did
Mhm,
study Persian for a while. I studied Persian in Iran in
mhm,
2001, but I really, Persian really came into disuse. I didn't really keep up my Persian,
mhm.
unfortunately.
Fascinating. Your academic path began in South Asian languages and civilizations. How has your deep grounding in language and culture influenced your research in political science and security studies?
Yeah, because I'm not a political scientist. A lot of people look at the journals that I've published in, and because I've, published a number of quantitative studies, that I'm a political scientist, but I'm really not. I've been an autodidact in that regard, and I've had some great mentors and some great co-authors. I think it comes up in the interstices of my research. So many, many years ago, when I could still go back to Pakistan, the Pakistan Army took me to Waziristan. And partly because I'm a woman, they were constantly underestimating me. So they let me sit in the jump seat between the two helicopter pilots, and they let me put on the earphones so I could hear the pilots' conversations. And I remember hearing them say when we crossed the Indus, Mashallah, Indus Pardia, thank God we've crossed the Indus. And
Hmm.
I could hear the sigh of relief when we crossed the Indus. And this is relevant to people who understand how Pakistan views lands west of the Indus and
Hmm.
lands east of the Indus.
Hmm.
West of the Indus, it's Junglistan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
East of the Indus is civilization. I remember when I was doing my work on madrasas, I was at this madrasa in Karachi called
Hmm.
Banuri Town. And I didn't let on that I read or spoke Urdu. I just let them give me their tour.
Hmm.
And I detected all sorts of inconsistencies. And at the end of the tour, when I met the Nazim, I said, you said that only students above the grade of 10 study here,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
saw a fourth grade qaida. So this is not consistent. You said that the students don't engage in political activities, but all over the walls, I saw posters for political activities.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
went through this whole list of inconsistencies that I found, and he was very upset with the tour guide who was a British Pakistani. He's like, you
Yeah,
didn't tell me she know Urdu.
yeah.
So it comes up in places like that. And then, of
Hmm.
course, I do a lot of literary translation.
Very interesting. Your latest book explores the literature of Lashkar-e-Taiba. How does cultural production like poetry and prose serve militant organizations?
So it serves their organizations considerably. First, it's a recruitment tool primarily.
Mm.
And so part of this serves as recruitment. So there's a large section in the book where we translate really a selection of
Mm.
militant biographies. This is the sort of Shaheed biographies after they're slain in an operation. And you can see that they're serving multiple audiences. On the one hand, these Shaheed biographies address them as these Bahadurs who take on, these Indian security forces in large number and they're
Mm.
martyred in the act of bravery. But they're also messaging to women. They tell their mothers and their sisters that they should behave modestly, that they should dress modestly,
Mm.
that they should make sure that their other sons prepare for the jihad. In some cases, they explain what the organization does. So I think one of the most important documents that we translate in that volume is Hum Kyun Jihad Kar Rahe Hain. It
Mhm.
explains why and it's not the big jihad of,
Right.
struggling to be a better human. No, it's
Mm.
the blow up shit kind of jihad.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And so that's a really important document because it
Right.
explains what the Lashkar is, what they do, and why they do it. So each of the documents serve different purposes, but all of which are to advance the organization's
Mm.
standing amongst Pakistanis and any other community that can read Urdu. I should add that they also publish in Arabic as well as in English. So
Fascinating.
their reach is not simply limited to Urdu.
Fascinating. Uh, let's now talk about security and political affairs in South Asia. What, in your view, are the central drivers behind the persistence of Islamic militancy in South Asia?
So, I mean, so we have to, I'm going to first start with Islamic militancy in Pakistan, and I
Yeah.
would say the ISI.
Hmm.
Going back to the 50s and the 60s,
Mm.
Pakistan began supporting the Jamaat Islami in Afghanistan. A
Mm.
lot of people think that the jihad really began in 1979. That's really untrue. It began in
Mm.
1973 under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto,
Mm.
when uh, Dowd had ousted King Zahir Shah and began this modernization campaign and the crackdown on Islamists. The Islamists fled to Pakistan. Um, at the time, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had just come off the loss of East Pakistan, and he wasn't going to lose any more territory. And the Afghans were engaging in a variety of shenanigans in the tribal areas in
Mm.
what was then the Northwest Frontier Province and Balochistan. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto saw this as an opportunity for payback.
Mm.
As is well known, after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the jihad also enjoined the support of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and of course the Chinese provided weapons, and it became a much grander affair.
Mm.
And as is also well known, when that so-called jihad came to a close, it was now under the direction of Zia al-Haq, and he redirected some of those elements into Kashmir, which had become susceptible after decades of Pakistani efforts because of
Mm.
Indian electoral malfeasance.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the terrorism in South Asia really comes down to the ISI.
Mm.
There's Bangladesh, the dynamics are really quite different because you don't have an intelligence agency that's directing it. That is more the result of indigenous dynamics, but also there's international groups like Al Qaeda and the Islamic State that have operated in Bangladesh.
Mm.
But the preponderance is really the root cause of it, in my estimation, is Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI.
Amazing, amazing. And to what extent is state weakness versus deliberate state policy responsible for the survival of militant networks?
So, in my view, the the Pakistani state is like Swiss cheese. It's not like
Mm.
American cheese. If you take a bite of American cheese, no matter where you bite it, it's the same. Swiss cheese has holes. Well,
Mm.
Pakistan can live with those holes as long as those holes are manageable and they know where those holes are.
Yeah.
So the Pakistani state isn't weak in entirety. You have this very strong army.
Mm.
And as long as the army's there, no matter what happens, Pakistan is a stable instability. It's not going to fall apart as some of my colleagues in India hope for reasons that I don't quite understand. Who wants
Mm.
that country to fall apart?
Correct.
So it's not an issue of state weakness per se. Where state weakness does come into play is the blowback that Pakistan has experienced from these decades of support for these Islamist militants. So as is
Mm.
well known, the Pakistani Taliban is ravaging the state. Well, there'd be no Pakistan Taliban had there been no Afghan Taliban.
Correct.
Um, Pakistani state weakness in countering the Pakistani Taliban is real and it's significant and it
Hmm.
explains the countless deaths that Pakistanis are experiencing every year.
Hmm.
But it's also this strength of the state that makes it impossible for the Indian government to coerce Pakistan into abandoning this policy.
Hmm. Fascinating. What role do religious seminaries and education systems play in radicalization? How do local communities reconcile support for militant groups with the costs they bear from violence?
So that's a really good question. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about madrasas being these factories of jihadis.
Hmm.
It really depends on the group. Lashkar-e-Taiba does not recruit from madrasas, and the
Hmm.
reason is Lashkar-e-Taiba needs high quality individuals to conduct the operations that they engage in, and you're not
Hmm.
going to get that human capital coming from a madrasa. I remember years ago, 25 years ago, I was up at 15th Corps in Srinagar, and they let me look at the militant training manuals, the notebooks that the militants used in the course
Hmm.
of their training. And they were taking notes in English, they were drawing elaborate schemata. They were taking notes on which compounds are available in different pharmacies that you mix in which quantities to make IEDs. These are not skill sets that are acquired in a
Correct.
madrasa.
Correct.
Now, some groups that rely upon suicide bombers, the Taliban is an example, they do rely upon madrasa graduates, but or you don't even have to be a graduate. Madrasa failouts more likely.
Yeah.
So it depends upon the group whether or not they use a madrasa, and you can usually discern this from the human capital requirements of the operations that they launch.
Hmm. And how central is Pakistan's military and intelligence establishment in sustaining groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba?
I would argue without Pakistan's military and intelligence establishment, it would be very difficult for these. Well, let me reframe.
Hmm.
If the Pakistani state turned its guns against the Lashkar-e-Taiba
Hmm.
and it deprived it of all of the amenities that the state has heretofore provided it, it would be very difficult for Lashkar to survive.
Hmm. Wow. Another question I wanted, Christine, was that how has Pakistan managed international pressure while continuing to maintain and support militant proxies?
Hmm. Well, that's actually kind of easy. They have nuclear weapons.
Okay.
No one wants Pakistan to fail.
Yeah.
No one. Can you imagine Pakistan as a failed state
Hmm.
with the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world and running amok with
Hmm.
jihadis? No one wants Pakistan to fail. So
Correct.
basically, Pakistan negotiates with the guns to its head,
Hmm.
save me before I shoot myself.
Hmm.
It's very effective.
What a
It's a
great
form of
response.
nuclear
Yeah.
coercion.
Fascinating. Great response. Do you see divisions within Pakistan society on the state sponsorship of militant groups? Because I've often seen this with many people that while I agree that Islam is a religion of peace, I've often asked many friends, highly educated friends, why don't you condemn something? And they don't.
So this answer So first of all, a lot of people don't believe they do it. So there's
Hmm.
just a large swath of disbelief. There's a lot of Pakistanis who just don't know about it. So I
Hmm.
think, when foreigners talk about, the US Iran Contra affair and how did Americans support this? Well, most Americans didn't even know about it, much less support it. And
Hmm.
so in the same vein, a lot of Pakistanis just don't know about this, right? Pakistan is still largely pre-literate. I think the literacy rate is under 40%, and that's a very generous definition of literacy.
Right, right.
But also, those who do know Pakistan does it, they view Kashmir as belonging to Pakistan.
Hmm.
They believe that India is engaging in atrocities in Kashmir, and Indian organizations have themselves indicated and documented the extent of abuses in Kashmir. So they're not entirely wrong.
Hmm.
So those who do know that it's happening justify it because of the belief that Kashmir belongs to Pakistan
Hmm.
and that India is misbehaving.
Hmm. Amazing, amazing. In your assessment, can Pakistan ever truly separate itself from the militant organizations it has sponsored?
So, Pakistan's grand strategy calls for Pakistan to resist the normalization of Kashmir and to resist India's rise in the international system. And what the Pakistanis get using a group like Lashkar-e-Taiba is a very effective source of conflict generation with
Hmm.
some without the same cost as using a conventional military.
Hmm.
And of course, if Pakistan were to just invade Kashmir with
Correct.
conventional military, the
Yeah.
response to that from India as well as internationally would be quite different. So
Hmm.
Pakistan is able to generate conflict for India while constraining the risk that it generates and also constraining the cost. It's much more sustainable.
Hmm. But do you see a general widespread support of, as Bhutto said, bleed India with 1,000 cuts across all of Pakistan? Because ultimately it's only harming Pakistan and Pakistan society.
So first, I haven't been allowed back into Pakistan since 2013. So
Okay.
I don't feel comfortable saying, how much there's widespread
Sure.
support for this.
Sure. Sure.
But certainly in Pakistan's media, there's widespread support generation for that position.
Hmm.
Blowback is real in Pakistan, but most Pakistanis actually think that the blowback is because of India,
Hmm.
not because of the state. So, for example, when the attack on the Pakistan Army public school happened, they said it was Afghanistan se hokar Bharat ka sazish. It was an
Hmm.
Indian
Conspiracy.
conspiracy
Yeah.
waged through Afghanistan.
Hmm.
So they don't attribute it to their own state policy. They
Hmm.
view it to American, Israeli, and Indian connivance.
Hmm. Wow. One more question relating to Pakistan, and then I have a few questions on India. How has the digital space, including social media, changed the operational and propaganda landscape for Islamic militants?
So before they were cut out of Twitter, it was very effective. Now they
Hmm.
still have some presence on Twitter, like they do have a shadow presence on Twitter. Facebook has been much more permissive for these
Hmm.
groups. It's been a while since I looked for a Jamaat al-Dawa Facebook page, but by a while, I mean a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
For example, Darul Andalus, which is their publishing arm, still has a Facebook page presence.
Hmm.
So before there was an effort to crack down on them, it was a huge opportunity. But like I said, Lashkar-e-Taiba still has opportunities on Facebook.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think the other thing is the supporting communities have been given a lot of space, but also secular liberals have been given a lot of space on Twitter. You finally meet in cyberspace these secular liberals that you've been hoping to meet all your life.
Right, right. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Christine, few questions now on India. I'd love to get your perspective on how should India rethink its counterterrorism strategy in light of Pakistan's continued proxy warfare.
So this is, obviously if someone had an answer for this, India would
I
be doing
agree.
it. So
Yes.
I think this is a tough question.
Mm,
I think India is in a really bad conundrum because of the incessant support for cross-border terrorism. The Indians have to maintain this huge counterinsurgency grid in
mm,
Srinagar.
mm,
It would be dereliction of duty to do otherwise. But unfortunately, a lot of the forces in that counterinsurgency grid are not very attuned to human rights.
mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
I remember Major Gogoi was accoladed for strapping a Kashmiri young man to the
Yeah.
front of a Jeep. I mean, that's
Mm,
a war crime,
yeah.
right? And instead of being condemned, it was accoladed. He was given the Army's highest orders,
Mm,
highest commendation for that creativity in the
mm,
battle space. Um, this creates local hostility and animosity, which in turn makes them susceptible for recruitment and radicalization.
mm,
And so, unfortunately, from a point of view of kinetics, India has to respond to the situation that presents it.
Mm.
And unfortunately, the international community, for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already talked about, has really been loath to put Pakistan under pressure to cease supporting these groups.
Mm.
Um, we had Fatah, which was this basically terrorism financing task force.
Yeah.
Pakistan was never on the blacklist as it so richly deserved to be, because if it
Mm.
were on the blacklist, it wouldn't qualify for IMF funding.
Correct.
And that would quickly result in economic collapse for
Mm.
Pakistan. So it was
Mm.
always kept on the gray list. And then
Mm.
astonishingly, it was removed from the gray list. So India is operating largely on its own. And what we've seen from the response to the Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor is that India feels the need to outdo its last response. And
Mm.
this has put us into a cycle of very dangerous and quick escalation, all the while without doing anything to change Pakistani behavior.
Mm.
So while Operation Sindoor may have paid richly in dividends for Modi politically, at the level of strategy, it was a huge failure because Pakistan's behavior remains uncompelled.
That's true. That's true. And what, in your view, is how or how should India balance internal security measures with protecting democratic freedoms and civil rights?
So again, this is a conundrum. If there was an easy answer, India would have cracked it by now.
Correct.
I mean, I tend to view it from a military, from an internal security point of view. India
Mm.
has really struggled with internal security reform.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not because the forces themselves don't want those resources, it's because
Mhm.
politicians haven't prioritized making those resources possible.
Mm.
Um, so police reform, but I would have thought that police reform in Kashmir would have merited much more attention than it has heretofore, given that
Mm.
they are a frontline force in the insurgency. The federal forces, it's a little bit more complicated because India has this ginormous force structure.
Yeah.
Modernizing it overnight is incredibly difficult.
Mm.
Even modernizing their weaponry, leave aside their training and
Mm.
tactics, is is
Mm.
a is a huge ask. But I think ultimately, if India is going to sustain this counterinsurgency grid, and I'm going to argue that it has to in perpetuity, it really needs to make sure that these forces are practicing the best counterinsurgency tactics. And
Mm.
unfortunately, many times, at least what's evident, so here's the problem. It's dependent variable selection bias. You
Right.
only see when the Indians screw up. You never see when the Indians get it right,
Right. Yes. Yes. Well said. Well said. So I've time for
right?
two. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I've time for two more questions for you, Christine. Should, in your view, India engage more directly with communities vulnerable to radicalization? And if so, how?
So, first of all, India has a lot of communities that are engaging in violence. Like we've mostly been focusing upon, for example, the
Yeah.
situation in Kashmir. But there's a very real and enduring Maoist problem in India
Correct.
as well,
Correct.
which at various times have actually been more sanguinary than the Kashmir situation.
Mm.
And the Maoist situation is really complicated, right? It's pertaining to India's desire to modernize and to get resources out of the ground. But this is at the expense of the communities who live on the ground from which India seeks to extract those resources.
Mm.
And the Maoists are very good at exploiting grievance.
Yeah.
Many people have been living in these IDP, these internally displaced persons encampments their entire lives,
Mm.
right? And clearly that's not best practices. So I think it really depends upon the group that you're talking about, how India should engage. What it
Mm.
takes to engage the Maoists, and the population that the Maoists draw from is very different from the population from which Kashmiri separatist
Yeah.
groups draw.
Yeah. Well said. And my last question for you, Christine. What lessons can India draw from other countries in dealing with long-standing insurgencies and terror threats?
So, you know, there's a couple of things about the terrorism and insurgency literature that I think are relevant. One, insurgent groups that have state support are nearly impossible to defeat. And this is why the counterinsurgency grid in Kashmir is going to be there for as long as the Pakistani support the terrorism group.
Correct.
The other is policing, right? Getting the balance of policing and army right. And there's no evidence to suggest that India is anywhere near what the literature says India should be doing.
Mm.
And then there's this body of literature on how one engages military operations on sacred spaces, because militant groups, like for example, we saw this with the Golden Temple with the Sikh insurgency, right? There are best practices on how you handle because religious operations can really inflame sentiment. So there's not
Mm.
a lot of evidence that India is engaging in the best practice in that regard either. So I
Mm.
think India has a long ways to go, and
Correct.
I would argue it's really urgent to bring India's practices in alignment with best practices, especially in places like Kashmir, where this presence is going to be there in perpetuity.
Mm. Wow. And on that note, Christine, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been with you. I
Oh,
think
thank you.
talking to you, I barely managed to scratch the surface with the deep knowledge you have about the region that I live in and Pakistan and India, of course. Uh, Thank you for speaking to me about your journey, about so many different aspects of Islamist militancy, and of course, some of the challenges that India should be addressing. Thank you again, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Have a fabulous day. All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.